each one of your kids gets a very different education. And that was something I didn't understand at the beginning.
Individualization doesn't have to be I'm running around being pulled in all different directions, being a different teacher for each person.
Remember when our kids, they weren't little, but when they planned their whole trip to Nepal by themselves.
And they paid for it, and that was an amazing experience. That's a great example of individualized education and a million other things, too.
Boredom is where creativity comes from.
That's all it is. It's actually very, very simple. What if I told you that a story could teach your child more history, science, math, and literature than a year of textbooks? Welcome to the Story Schooling Podcast. I'm Angel Selden, author of Curiouser.
And I'm Sandy Fouts, co-founder of Wonderwell Learning. Anytime that a program is based on state standards, it cannot be individualized. State standards are a way of making sure that everybody knows the exact same information and they don't miss any of those points of information, making sure that all that stuff is crammed into their heads. So anytime it's based on standards, it cannot be individualized. Those are two conflicting words.
It is, yet my local school district, that's one of their big selling points on their website, because they have a lot of students who open enroll in other school districts. And so their big thing that they're pushing is our learning is individualized. We cater to the individual. So what do they mean by that then? If they still have to teach all the same things to all the same kids, then what do they mean by individualized?
I'm curious if they're just talking. So sometimes I think the way that a program uses the word individualized, it's because, they can choose autos or computer programming. Like they can choose which one of these classes that they are
to
most interested in. So there is like a tiny little bit of individualized, like they have a choice of which class they might want. But even within that class, teachers aren't allowed to individualize very much because they still have to hit certain markers and follow certain regulations. My husband was an auto shop teacher for 4 years, and some of the things that he had to do, his students had to do a weekly assignment in which they had to answer in a complete sentence. And so he's like, that doesn't even apply to what I'm doing right now. And they're taking requirements they had school-wide and trying to make it fit into a CTE class that's all about hands-on learning. And it took out his ability to be able to even teach the students well because of all of the silly busy work and the requirements, because they wanted to introduce certain programs that are supposed to be the best. They required him to do Cornell notes in an autos class. It just doesn't apply.
Right. Well, and how can you, not only do they not have the freedom to really individualize, but realistically, from a practical standpoint, how can you individualize when you have 25 students for one block every day for an hour and 20 minutes, and then you have another set of 25 students for the next block and another set of 25 students for the next 2 blocks? And it's almost impossible.
That takes it back to the slow down and digging deep. So it would take them forever to finish a project because you have a 1-hour block in which you have to get set up and started and work on a project, but leave enough time to clean up and put everything away. And there was just never enough time. He had his advanced students they had 2 hours, which allowed for some progress to happen. But in that 1 hour, they really didn't make hardly any progress or learn very much because they didn't have the time to create the projects and even really to think about what they wanted to do within their project. So a lot of it that actually made progress or learned happened after hours or extended times or came in during their lunch period so they could actually make progress on their work.
Right. You mentioned choosing how you fulfill your tech credit. There's also choosing your language, and it's between
Mhm.
3 different languages, French, German, or Spanish, usually, and you have to choose one because, heaven forbid you don't learn another language, um, whether you need it or not, or whether you have interest or not. Um, you can choose it. You have to take music, at least until high school, and so you can choose either band, orchestra, or choir. But I think that, so like you said, there's a little bit of wiggle room. I mean, there's a spectrum of
Mhm.
individualization, how much you can individualize a course of study. So what I tell homeschoolers is the only reason that education institutions have created curriculums to follow and created all these checklists is because it's the cheapest and most efficient way to educate the masses and to make sure that you're checking all the boxes for everything that we think that they should know by the time they graduate, which is really obsolete. With AI, it's just not necessary anymore. Of course, we should have a lot of knowledge, but then why is it important exactly what that knowledge is, and why do we all have to have all the same knowledge by the time we graduate? Um, what are my other thoughts? I mean, so really the only other parameter by which they individualize is in speeding them up, like, oh, you're
Oh,
advanced, you're
right.
ahead of the rest. And
Mhm.
so maybe you're a little ahead on the conveyor belt, or you're not picking up on it, so we're going to set you back on the conveyor belt. But it's still the same conveyor belt. It's all the same information. It's all in the same order. But guess what? You, as a homeschooler, have the freedom and flexibility to do it not only differently, but to do it better because it's one-on-one, and you can truly individualize your child's curriculum.
I
So
would
what do you
say
think? How are ways we can do that? Or what were you going to add to that?
so I would say if it's systemized, it's not individualized. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have that beauty as homeschoolers to be able to individualize it. One myth I like to debunk for homeschoolers also is the fact that I think there's this stigma that goes around that if you're not, as the parent, teaching it all and providing it all yourself as the homeschool parent, that you're not a true homeschooler. And I take a different approach that I believe that our job is to be their guide. Our job is to lead them and give them the tools necessary, whether that be in the form of a curriculum or a mentor or books. Your job is simply to guide them and lead them, and through that process, you're individualizing it. Another thing that I learned over the years was that you're individualizing it not just for your family, but you're individualizing it per student. Like each one of your kids gets a very different education. And that was something I didn't understand at the beginning. I thought that I was going to choose a curriculum that was the best one out there, of course. And I was going to use that curriculum all the way through for 12 years with all of my kids because it was the best. And I very quickly learned that every child is very different and our home changed. And therefore, those dynamics changed, and I was continually needing to shift and change things and individualize it for the season of life that we were in, for the students specifically, for my kids, for what I had the capacity to do. And it's we want a simple answer. We want that just tell me exactly how to do this. There is nobody can tell you exactly what your child needs. Otherwise, it would be systemized and not individualized.
So I'm on board with what you're saying, but that sounds super complicated to me
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of other parents. Like, whoa, what if I have 3 kids close together in age, and now I'm homeschooling 3 times as much because I have to do a different approach and a different curriculum, and I have to be like a different mentor for each child. So, and I think that it might sound on the surface like I'm disagreeing with you, but I think that there are still some fundamental truths that we agree on. I literally just spend 1 hour, 1 to 1.5 hours a day with all of my kids at once. And maybe I'll put in, I'm available the rest of the day for older
Mhm.
kids who have other needs, like when I was working on Russian with Lydia. But I think it's actually is very simple. So you're saying it's not so simple. There's not one simple answer. I think there is one simple answer, and I think it is read lots of great books. I think
That's what I was
that is the curriculum.
that's what I was gonna say with
And obviously you agree with that.
yeah, you start with a story and that's for all of them together. You're reading I
Uh-huh.
mean, it depends on the age groups of your kids, but generally speaking, kids within fairly close ages, well, they don't even have to be that close.
They don't. And I
Um
have lots of examples of that,
yes.
of what I
Yeah.
can share later, because my kids are all 4 years apart. That seems huge in the education world. Like
Mhm.
even being a year apart is like, whoa, I'm going to
Right.
have to homeschool them differently because they're 1 year apart,
But it's amazing what the younger ones can get so much out of they can get stuff out of the books that you're reading that are way above their level. They just get something different. And I have found a lot of beauty in actually the most simple picture books that the older kids, even myself, can derive out of a simple picture book. So, but yeah, the answer really is you start with stories and then you open your ears and you listen. You listen to the questions or you give prodding questions and allow them to start to answer that.
And letting them pursue. So here's where the individualization comes in, because you're
Mhm.
reading the same stories aloud to all of your kids. For the most part, I am. So here's where the individualization comes in. Stories are like the perfect way to individualize without making any extra work for yourself, because the beauty of a great story is that we're all pulling different things from it. So
Mhm.
regardless of age differences, you and I might read the same book, Sandy, and we're going to have different aha moments that we can pull from it. And that's the beauty of a book club, right? That's what adults do when they want to
Mhm.
learn, is they have a book club and they share the different insights that they've had. So I think these are the two main ways that that are the most effective and organic way to individualize that we can do in our homeschools and keep it simple. So the first one, like I said, is stories, and just we're all pulling different things from the same stories, and continuing to dive deep maybe in this particular child is interested in medieval times. So I'm going to find more books that have to do with medieval times for that child. The second way is facilitating the projects and skill development and experiences and interests that each individual has. And I think it's that simple. I think that's all you
Mhm.
need to do. Your child, now you have to, like you've said before, Sandy, not only be discerning as to what's worth your time and effort. I don't even think it's so much a matter of, is this really important? Because as we've discussed before, sometimes those desires and questions of theirs that seem the most insignificant or useless or
Mhm.
unimportant or non-academic, non-educational are the ones that lead to the most powerful learning
Right.
experiences. It's more a matter of, we can't do everything, obviously,
Mhm.
pursue everything that they have an interest in or go in depth in, but you can one at a time.
Do you have any examples of maybe a story that you were digesting or reading through and it sparked individual, different rabbit trails for different individuals?
Yeah, so this is just off the top of my head. I thought of this just now. Um, my oldest was 14, my middle child was 10, my youngest was 6. And we read The Emperor's New Clothes, a very simple fairy tale. Is it Hans Christian Andersen? I
I
can't
think so.
remember.
I'm not sure.
I think it's Hans Christian Andersen. And you would think this is for little kids, right? Even my 10-year-old was too old for it, but certainly a 14-year-old is too old for The Emperor's New Clothes. Absolutely not. There are powerful themes and ideas in these fairy tales that we can have conversations about. So I read this one morning, and my youngest is just taking the story and like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this guy actually thinks that he's wearing clothes that everybody else can see and he can't. And my oldest, I don't remember the details of this conversation, but it reminded me of a study that was done at Arizona State University, actually, your home state, because it's one of the biggest party schools, and they had a terrible problem with binge drinking. So one psychologist or psychology professor, researcher at the university thought, I'm going to figure out a way to help ameliorate this problem. And so she put out a survey to a large sample of students asking about their drinking habits. And it turned out that the ones who were drinking the most all thought that everybody else was drinking more than they were. She understood the principle that, should I say, she understood based on previous or established research that people tend to behave in a way that they think others are behaving. And so it's okay. It's super boring, this study.
No.
I'm just kidding.
I was trying so hard to. Sorry, I did not
You're
sleep
fine.
well.
I'm not offended at all. This is actually super fascinating, Sandy. You should be listening. You should be like wide-eyed and on tenterhooks. So when she put up posters around campus saying the average student only drinks this much on the weekends, that alone made the binge drinking problem, made it drop. It made it better. It didn't eliminate it. But I mean, they were having deaths and hospitalizations from drinking too much alcohol.
Right.
And so just putting out the information that you realize that most people don't drink that much, right? All of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, I guess I'll drink less too, because people tend to want to be like their peers. I ended up having this incredible conversation with Lydia about this idea and how can we connect those two? Like, this research actually supports the idea of the Emperor's New Clothes, that because he thought everybody, and not just him, because everybody thought everybody else was seeing the clothes, they were pretending that they could see the clothes, even though they couldn't. And then once, of course, it was a child who we discussed, why was it a child who pointed it out? Well, children aren't nearly so worried about what people think of them or about looking stupid. They're humble and they're open to being wrong. And that's how we need to be as students, as learners, is we need to be like that child who's willing to say, hey, I know it seems like everybody else knows this, but I don't know this, and I'm willing to say this is what I see. We made a connection then to when we read about the story of Galileo, when he could see that it was actually the Earth that was revolving around the sun and not the other way around, but everybody else is saying, no, it's not, that's not true. We know that that the Earth is at the center of the universe and the sun revolves around the Earth. That's obvious. We can see that with our own eyes. But when he looked closer through the telescope, he saw something different. And so Galileo was like that little child who was saying, I know that everybody else is saying they see something different and we know something different, but I have to be honest about what I see with my own two eyes. And so those are some ways that we have individualized even a fairy tale to older kids.
And these connections happened because you were reading just different stories, and it didn't have to be Galileo.
Exactly.
Yeah, you could have been reading something else that would have had a similar connection. And so if we're just constantly bringing these stories and reading these stories and we're getting them in their whole, and then we start taking them apart afterward, but we start with that whole story, and then there's all of these connections that start linking together between the stories when you start asking questions about them, or you pause a little bit to think about them, allow your kids to think about them. And something I think it's important to note is that when we're reading stories and we ask questions, that our kids know that we're not looking for a right answer. We're not asking questions like, now, what did he say after he did this? Or what color were the shoes? Like, you're asking questions that they know there's no right answer to. You really want to know, what are their thoughts? And you're listening.
Or What other characters in other books that we've read have made a similar choice or had a similar experience or
Mm-hmm. Right.
also developed their observation skills or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
may be? Just this morning, my son, who just turned 16 yesterday, he started his college classes for this semester. And just to preface really quick, he earned his diploma in carpentry at our local technical college this past year. And now this year, he's just finishing 17 credits to get his associate's degree. For one of his classes today, he had to take a little test to determine what kind of learner are you? And it was like mild kinesthetic, strong kinesthetic, mild visual, strong visual, moderate visual, and all these different. So what do you think about, before I share my thoughts on that, what do you think about learning styles? Is there merit to them? And if there is merit to them, how does that matter in our homeschools?
Oof. I do think there is merit to them. My thoughts are that if we bring things in different multidisciplinary, multisensory ways, and then allow our child to gravitate towards one or the other, but never stop bringing it in, whether it's audio and visual, or trying to think of some examples. I mean, I think the best way we learn is by experiences, right? And anytime
Mm-hmm.
we're experiencing these in their whole form, but there's ways in which to experience, like if you're, say you're studying Shakespeare, whether you're going to the play and watching it. I mean, there's many multi ways in which you're experiencing that.
Mm-hmm.
My thoughts are a little bit all over the place, that I think it's
Well, can I add
important.
to that?
Yeah.
You can finish your thought. Well, I
Yeah.
wanted to add to what you were saying is that I think it's almost a non-issue if you are learning from
The
the whole,
whole. Yeah.
because this really only applies if you're just trying to drill information into somebody's head. If you have a list of, what's the word, of an agenda. So if you have this agenda of boxes to check and information to get in a child's brain, and it's out of context of the whole, you are making more work for yourself, because now you have the task of what's the best way to get this into this child's brain? Are they visual? Do they need to move? But actually, if it's a whole experience and a whole story,
Mm-hmm.
we know, studies show that stories, great stories, engaging stories resonate with everyone. This is not, you don't need to worry about, are you
Right.
kinesthetic or visual? But there is some merit to that. And I think if you're just doing stories and facilitating projects and experiences and interests that they want to have, they will make it very clear to you how they want to approach that.
Exactly.
In general, I think that if children are brought up listening to stories being read to them, they develop that skill of taking in stories orally. But a child may say, they prefer to read it themselves with their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to tell you that. I want to
Mm-hmm.
read this with my eyes. I prefer that to listening. Or they will tell you, I want to go mountain biking. Okay, they need to move. And that's actually the perfect example, because our next episode will be interviewing a woman whose son developed an interest in mountain biking, and she's going to tell the whole story and all the learning that unfolded organically from that mountain biking experience, including intellectual learning, including character development, and a strengthening of relationships with many people as a result of that experience. And so they will communicate to us what their needs are. If they're drawn to visual things or if they need to move, you don't need to take a test in order to figure that out. You had said in a previous episode, we don't really need to foster curiosity. Our main job is that we're trying not to kill it. And I think the same is true with being in tune with how we need to learn. And we just are trying not to kill that and allowing them to experience life enough and have an open line of communication so that you can you can just leverage that energy and the direction they're going in.
Yeah.
And be in tune with your child. Listen to them. What are their
Mm-hmm.
interests? That's all it is. It's actually very, very simple. I think it would be helpful to know, like, well, what does your day look like then? Are you just like standing around waiting for your kids to show interest in something? Do you have a flow to your day? Do you have pieces in place, rituals that you do every day to incorporate these things? Because I really want to keep this simple for listeners,
Mm-hmm.
that individualization doesn't have to be I'm running around being pulled in all different directions, being a different teacher for each person. And well, my one child's a kinesthetic learner.
You asked about what a day looks like. So
Yes.
maybe I can, and it's been so different over the years. I said a little bit ago, I thought that I knew what it would look like to homeschool. And it definitely does not look anything like that now. And it didn't really look like the same ever, like year to year, month to month, sometimes even week to week. It was a little different. Sometimes we fell into some really good rhythms or some different rhythms that stuck around for a while, but then they were always shifting and changing. Right now, our rhythm is, my daughter takes a lot of Wonderwell learning classes. She actually gets to choose the ones that she wants. So she flips through the the courses that are available. She has her favorite instructors and she chooses the one she wants. So she gets to do a lot of that, which is a lot of interest-led learning. And so those go on her calendar or on her schedule. And then she gets an hour of time with her mom, with me. And typically there's things that I already know that she wants to be doing. So we'll do those things that she's interested in. Or it's stories. So we're either doing stories or exploring something that came from those stories or something else that has come that she has a desire and interest and she needs my guidance to do. So she has that hour with me. That's every day. And then she gets an hour with her dad. So her dad's home right now. And their time is typically always project based. So he has something that he wants to do and she loves this time. He brings her along. So this morning they were installing sprinklers. We're doing a sprinkler system in our front yard. So he's teaching her about, all the little things that would go along with that. And she's asking her questions. And so it's always something different.
That's so cool.
We own our own businesses. And at the beginning of the year, we asked her, like, what are the things that are important to you to learn this year? And one of the things she says is, I want to learn more about businesses and help with the businesses and what does it mean to be an entrepreneur and how do I do that? And so he's taking her along with him when he does the businesses, when he does the bank deposit, he takes her into the bank and she has gotten her own bank account and she was interested in creating herself a budget. She's looking at the things that we do and then she's starting to ask questions. So he takes her along on his whatever it is he's doing and she just experiences real life with him. And then with me, it's usually more stories and the interests that she has. And then at night, we read to her. So I'm at the tail end. I have a 10-year-old right now, and then I have 3 others that are 18 and older. And so they do their own thing. And so really it's just one, which is very different when I had several of them all together, and that rhythm was very different than it is now. So that's what it looks like for us right now.
I love that. Our rhythm also changes a lot, but like you, what we always have in place is we have the bedtime cuddles and read aloud together.
Yep.
And we have the morning read aloud. And what I started with my 4th child that I didn't do with any of the others was after the morning read aloud or before. Actually, we do it before because reading aloud feels like dessert, even though he enjoys the math part. We don't follow a math curriculum, but I will throw out a math question or something that I'm curious about, which is usually inspired by, for a while, it's been inspired by a Paul Lockhart book that we've been reading called Measurement. I want to get into that in another episode, really dive deep into math, because as brilliant as Paul Lockhart is, we do not just read through that book. I think that you can get way more out of it if you don't just read through that book. And instead, I look at each section and I create a question or a challenge out of that section so that I'm not just reading the explanation. And that's been really fun and powerful. But what I've noticed with that is that it's intense. It's very intense thinking. And we'll do it for a couple weeks or sometimes even a month. And then we get to the end of this rabbit trail or this exploration, and it kind of has exhausted itself. And then we just need a break. And so it's not like on my checklist that we have to do a math challenge every single day. I mean, and one math challenge could last a week or 2 weeks, like sparked from a single question can lead to sometimes it takes us a while to even answer that question, that one question, but sometimes it leads to another question, which leads to another question. I think people think it's amazing that, you would spend half an hour a day on, or sometimes you would spend 45 minutes on math, and it would just be one question, which is, I think, unfamiliar to most of us. That sounds very foreign to just be working on one problem for 45 minutes. I think most people would hear that and think, oh, so they're slow to pick up on it. There's a problem. No, actually, not at all. It's because I've intentionally not shown them how to do something, and I ask a really hard question. I asked my 8-year-old, what fraction of a turn are you turning each time if we were to walk around a triangle and turn and then walk down the other side of the triangle and turn and walk down the other side of a triangle? What fraction of a turn are we making there? 1/8, quarter, 3/4. So that one took like a week, every day for 5 days of just letting him explore that. And you would think that a child would not want to do that and be exhausted. But it's energizing if they're, like we talked about before, choosing to do that. I really went off. I guess that's another way you individualize. Okay, so anyway, my point is I was talking about my day. Okay, before I share our typical flow of day, I want to back up and share what determines the content of our days, and it's another key to individualizing their education. So I meet with each of my kids once a month for a mentor meeting, and at these meetings, we review what went well over the past month, and I ask if they have any new interests, desires, or goals. Then we explore what habits we can incorporate into our day or week to help them fulfill those goals or desires. So, for example, when one of my sons was 7, he had a desire to get better and faster at reading. So his daily habit for that month was to read a certain number of minutes a day on his own. But the goals don't have to be academic or intellectual. They can be physical or social as well. So now he's 8, and he suddenly developed this strong desire to summit Pikes Peak. And I will get into that story and share how it went in a future episode. So we've incorporated into his daily and weekly habits training with me for this hike. Last Saturday, we walked 13 miles together. That's how determined he is to summit this mountain. But back to our flow of day. So I generally wake up a couple hours before he does, and I do my own work before he wakes up. I do my own scripture study and feed myself spiritually in the morning. And then I do my work. And then he wakes up and eats breakfast and unloads the dishwasher. And then we do that math and read aloud. And sometimes we take a break from math and we just do the read aloud. And then the other piece that we have in place is the bedtime. And everything in between that has changed over the years. But generally, they have a lot of discretionary time because I have a lot of projects I'm working on. I've been writing a book for the past few years. I have obviously this podcast, which is very time consuming, and I run a micro school. So I have a lot on my plate. Unless I tell them I am unavailable while I'm podcasting, I am available if they want to come to me and they need my help to facilitate a project of theirs. They're not allowed to do screen time during that time. That's another piece to this individualization, come to think of it, is they need to have plenty of discretionary time. I think that discretionary time is key in individualizing. How on earth can you individualize when their entire day has been micromanaged for them? And I would even count your 10-year-old daughter's choice to use her discretionary time on those
Mhm.
Wonderwell learning classes, that's still discretionary time because
Right.
you're not setting up a schedule for her. She's choosing to use her time
Mhm.
that way. Having lots of discretionary time is so important for
Yeah.
individualizing a child's education.
I think you put a really good caveat in there, though, that screen time is not available during that, because we know there's that draw to for the brain to do that easy just sit and watch. And so boredom, we could do a whole thing on boredom, right? We know
We
that
are.
boredom,
I'm
we are.
planning a whole episode on boredom.
Yes. Boredom is where creativity comes from. And so not giving them, the simple option of watching a screen, I think that's important in the discretionary time, that you decide when that is available and when that's not available. Not that we don't ever do any screens, but to carefully choose when those are a tool to use and when they're not. Another piece I forgot to put in that we actually added to our rhythm this year that has been an interesting part of our day, it's kind of experimental, is of course I want my kids to be readers, and my kids hear me read out loud a lot. I read during the day, I'll read at night. But one thing I realized that they don't see often is they don't see me reading for pleasure very often, because it happens often when they're not around, and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that, I felt there was a need for my child to see me read. So we carved out a family reading time that we do, where my daughter has her own book in hand, I have my own book in hand, and my husband has his own book in hand, and we sit and just read our own books, and nobody tells anybody else what to read. Sometimes we'll discuss, a little bit afterward, and that's been really fun to curate that extra little piece of time within our day.
I love that.
So some discretionary
And
within that.
that's individualized because you're choosing what book you want to read,
Yeah. Yep.
but you're providing a framework.
Mm-hmm.
They can have freedom within a framework. That reminds me of, have you heard the Leonardo da Vinci quote? Art lives within constraints and dies in freedom. I better look that up too. Da Vinci quote, art lives within constraints and dies in freedom. Oh, I was almost exactly right. I can't believe I remembered that. Art lives from constraints and dies from freedom. But it's this idea that there need to be some boundaries and
Mm-hmm.
limitations in place in order for art or creativity or innovation to spring from that. When people
Right.
have total freedom and there's absolutely no limits given to them, that dies. And I think that's a good example. Like, you can even watch screens if you want, then you are going to take the path of least resistance. And I do believe that children they're inherently curious, they're inherently driven, they want to learn, but I think they're developing self-discipline. And there is in The Comfort Crisis, I don't mean to quote it again, but it's the book I'm reading right now. And so, of course, I'm making connections to everything. Oh, there's just tons of research in that book that strongly supports that creativity and innovation happens when people are bored and do not have their screens available to relieve that boredom.
Remember when our kids, they weren't little, but when they planned their whole trip to Nepal by themselves out of just like that was all their own individualized interest. And I remember Kiva was good at finding flights, so she found the flight and they all pitched in, and
That's
I don't know.
right. And they
That
paid for it, and that was an amazing experience. That's a great
that's
example
something we
of
should.
individualized education
Mm-hmm.
and a
Mm-hmm.
million other things
And there's
too.
so much that came from that. I mean, I can list that was a life-changing experience for Kiva, especially because she actually needed that after her sister passed away. Like that the that experience of planning and going and getting outside of her normal environment provided an extreme amount of healing that she needed at that time in her life. There's so much that they learn and gain.
Versus when they've been on screens, they are less creative. So, yeah.
So bringing it back to the individualized learning, a lot of that's done by the individual themselves, right? Allowing them that discretionary time where they're choosing where they're drawn to and what they're led to, and allowing them to be bored for a little bit.
It is allowing them to have discretionary time, and they will tell you how they want to learn, what they want to do. And then your job as the mentor is to leverage those interests and those desires as a learning experience organically. We're really going to dive into that next episode. And then the other piece is stories, and that individualized learning happens almost effortlessly and completely organically when we read lots of great books with our kids. So what's the challenge for this week, Sandy? We can think of one together.
We had it here. Hold on. I was just trying to
did we
find
have
it.
one? Didn't see it.
In the outro.
Well, you know what? There's I see. Yeah, when you hear the phrase individualized learning.
Where was it?
Well, let's keep it simple. I like question 2 is good. Well, first of all, we can say, if you haven't picked up a good book yet, pick up a good book. Make reading aloud for an hour a day part of your homeschool time. I really don't think it's important to make sure that you know if they learned something from the book that day. They are learning. You can know for sure that they are learning. And I think that the more we try to test to see if they are learning something, that undermines the learning.
Okay, so our challenge is to think about what your homeschool days look like right now. Are they more like a conveyor belt or more like stories, nature, and projects? We challenge you to think about how to individualize it and do that by simplifying and tying it back to stories.
And watching your kids. I would challenge you to pay more attention to your children and what they're communicating to you, what interests and needs they're communicating to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was fun. That was a really fascinating conversation. Thanks for taking the time.
If this podcast was helpful for you, please leave us a review and share with a friend.
Until next time, start with stories and everything else will follow.
You can learn more about our other education projects at angelselda.com and wonderwelllearning.com.